What up? All my scientists, my artists, my philosophers, my geneticists, my roboticists, my biologists, my archaeologists, my astronomers. Let's get busy. This has been Busy from the Burbs.
3, 2,
Sure.
1. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ben Busy from the Burbs, broadcasting to you from Osaka, Japan. I'm joined by my co-host for today's episode, Alex Streckel, aka Brainpolice, writer and musician from the United States of America. How are you, Brainpolice?
Hey, what's up, man? I'm pretty good.
Good. I'm pretty good here. It's a little cool today, but still unseasonably warm for the season. I'm not sure if you're experiencing similar temperature issues where you are, but actually it's much warmer than it usually is this time of year here in Japan.
Is it?
Yeah,
It's basically moderate, starting to get coldish here.
yeah. And you're in the Midwest, right?
That is correct. Although
Yeah.
I always think it's confusing that Ohio's called the Midwest, but yeah, it's
'Cause
it's the Midwest. According to custom, it is the Midwest.
it's the Midwest, but you're in the Eastern time zone, which totally blows my
Boggles your mind, huh?
But nevertheless, we're glad to have you on the program. In our last episode that we did together, we kind of explored the right wing. We looked at the Dark Enlightenment, neo-reactionary, the neo-reactionary movement, the libertarian movement. Of course, these kind of white nationalist movements kind of infiltrating libertarianism and going on to form the Dark Enlightenment, aka neo-reaction.
Right.
On this episode, we're taking a different approach. This episode, we want to focus on and discuss the other extreme wing, which is
Yeah, this is the left-wing social justice warrior types.
right. Which in many respects are just as culpable for the sad state of civil affairs in the United States as the right wing is. I think we're of the mind that no matter which extreme you are, whether you're right wing or left wing, that you really don't help add anything to the discussion substantively that can produce actionable intelligence where we could actually improve the lives of our citizens.
What a concept.
Yeah, can you believe that? That actually having a conversation could actually improve the condition of things?
No, I think we just shout people down and block their entrance to speeches.
Yeah, yes, that's what we should do. Hey, I need some muscle to get rid of this reporter over here. Yeah. What do you make of the SJW movement? I'm talking about the what is now classically known as kind of deleterious to social or civil progress or that has been made. Where did it come from, and where is it going? What are its goals?
Those are all very good questions. Where did it come from is a good question. And I guess one thing that's commonly talked about is just the culture of college campuses, and perhaps some of the skewed perspectives that are taught by certain professors in departments at colleges has something to do with it, I think.
Mhm.
And maybe just certain generational changes in which people are incredibly focused on issues of personal identity in a way that I find to be overly obsessive, if not, in some cases, mentally ill.
Are we talking expressly about gender identity or what?
That's one of the big things, but it doesn't have to only be that. But that is one of the big issues that comes in, I suppose. And I guess in a sense, it makes perfect sense that someone would focus on things that has to do with themselves. But it's very interesting because to me that I think there's a line somewhere where you become so obsessed that it can't possibly be a cohesive political and social way of thinking that you're approaching things from when everything is filtered through, for example, third wave feminism.
What
And
is
you've
what is third wave feminism for our
well,
listeners?
I'm using that's used as a shorthand for how would I describe it?
Like man-hating? Like,
Well, that could come into it, but also that brand of feminism that is focused on what I would call more peripheral issues, or that is focused on microaggressions and things of that nature,
yes.
and not so much focused on what I would consider more important and fundamental issues for women,
Mm-hmm.
but instead, where everything is about issues of personal image, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or just like for example, like being focused on arguing that fat women are beautiful. Like
Mm.
that seems like a petty issue.
Mm.
Things like that, where it's like you're obsessed with issues of body image for women, or with what I would really consider to be pretty minor personal issues
Mm-hmm.
that don't amount to you being oppressed.
Right.
But people make it out like they're oppressed, and they're like super obsessed with their identity as a woman, for example.
Right. So here we have
It's
third
very
wave.
strange to me how far people go with it.
Oh yeah, I mean it gets pretty ridiculous to the point where, and I have friends of mine who are morbidly obese. I am sensitive to their plight and the difficulty that goes along with having what
Sure.
is a medical condition. But I mean, to go so far as to require airlines to install obese seating,
Hmm.
I think is that's that's reaching. Like there are obese seats. They're called first class. You know, you can buy a first class seat, right?
Yeah.
You shouldn't feel like you're being discriminated against just because the seat is not accommodating your body. But
It just seems to me that, for example, with the feminism stuff, that like after a certain point, people just favor whatever favors the group in question indiscriminately. It's like, oh, you're beautiful no matter what. Objectively, no, not objective. In terms of how people actually think about beauty, that's not true.
mm-hmm.
Um, and that's just a minor example, but it just seems like for some of these people, women could do no wrong no matter what,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to demonize heterosexual males to an extreme. That seems unfair to me.
Right. We're joined by my co-host Zanish. Zanish, are you there right now? Apparently, he can't talk right now. I thought he was
I
going to
saw
be.
him join in though.
Yeah, he joined in the conversation, but apparently he's not able to speak. He might be at work at the moment, but he'll be listening in. Zanish has a lot to say on this topic as well, and what the psychological moorings for this kind of, like you said, it's kind of like it's an identity struggle, right?
It is an identity struggle.
We're looking to kind of coalesce, form our identity, and we do this by dividing ourselves from the group, whatever the
Yeah,
group may be.
and very obsessively focusing on where we come from personally,
Mm-hmm.
and turning politics into this sort of obsessive thing about fighting for the cause of the group that you happen to belong to,
Mm-hmm.
which can be divisive in terms of maybe trying to approach things from a more broad base of improving society as a whole.
Right.
How are you going to do that when everyone's fighting over, men's rights versus feminism and things like that?
Right. Whatever the case may be there, right? The SJWs use terms like microaggression, like
Right.
safe space, like
Yeah, those are definitely some of the big buzzwords in recent years.
yeah, there was another one. It escapes my mind at the moment, though. What is a microaggression? I tried looking it up the other day. I couldn't get a good definition. What
What did you get?
constitutes? Well,
What did you get when you tried to look it up?
I got perceived slight or something like that. A perceived, I don't even know what I looked up the Wikipedia definition. Zanish, are you there? What is a microaggression by definition?
I thought he was there, but I don't hear anything.
Okay, yeah, maybe he's having some technical difficulty. What, in your own words, Brain Police,
Hmm.
how would you define the microaggression?
Oh boy. I mean, I guess it seems like a lot of it has to do with things that offend people that the person who offended them didn't even necessarily purposefully intend it that way. That's part of it. And also just ways that people, assumptions that people make, or ways that people act that is supposed to implicitly be sexist or racist,
Mm-hmm.
even if explicitly it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
But I also feel like it's dishonest in the terminology of it, calling it an aggression.
Mm.
Not to be sound like a typical libertarian, but
Mm.
I mean, and be overly literal about the word aggression, but
Mm.
it seems a bit of a rhetorical trick to call something aggression when it's really about something somebody said.
Right. Why don't they call it a passive aggression? Because like, isn't this is basically passive aggressiveness reformalized with new
Sure.
language.
And maybe even some of the things that people do call microaggressions, I would agree and be like, that person's a dick.
Right.
But it's just, to me, all it is that person's a dick. It's not
Well, now
a calculated political affront to your very
right.
essence.
Right, exactly. Like I can be offended by everything. Suddenly now the universe offends me, and that gets very wearing on people like myself when I encounter people who really, when you drill down, haven't experienced a whole lot of adversity in their life whatsoever. They're co-opting the struggle of other people and waving that flag because
Hmm.
their life lacks meaning and they're seeking any way to form an identity to imbue their life with something substantive, something
Some
meaningful.
kind of meaning, and another part of it is to belong to some sort of group.
Right.
Hello.
Hey,
Hey,
Zanish.
what's up, man?
Hey, I'd like to chime in on this topic.
Yeah, so where
That
are
would
you
be
on this
great.
topic, Zanish?
So, from what I understand, passive aggression and microaggression aren't really interchangeable. Like,
Mm,
I know that it might seem that way.
mm,
But the claim is that there's things, cultural cliches or things that people just use mindlessly
Right.
that just so happen to carry things that they claim are triggering,
mm.
like talking about the American dream would automatically be triggering to some minority who like didn't have access to achieving white America's version, and like saying that like that's a microaggression unintentionally. Whereas
Right.
passive aggression is where I act sort of, you know, emotionally different than how I feel in order to manipulate you to have a specific outcome that I desire that you're not currently giving me.
Mm.
Right.
I get what you're
So
saying. That
yeah.
was a better clarification of what's meant by microaggression.
Hmm.
Right. So, but I think that it's crap. Personally,
Yeah.
um,
So
I mean,
that
aren't there some contexts in which this term microaggression would be valid, would have valid application?
I don't think so. I think there's just plain old
Aggression?
aggression. Well, I mean, like to claim that. All right, let's give out a long bit of rope to this
Hmm.
and say that microaggressions actually do exist.
Hmm.
But to claim that that in any way is bigoted
Hmm.
is ridiculous. It's
yeah,
not like
things that are unintentional can't be bigoted.
right.
Mm.
It's not like I mean you could say that there's inherent prejudices in all of language.
Well, this is what. Wait a minute. This is kind of what daunts me is the fact that we're saying that being a bigot requires some kind of intent, some kind of cognizance there behind the behind the scenes, kind of producing the behavior when in fact bigotry is kind of predicated on ignorance. So it would make sense that people who are microaggressing are ignorant. Does this? Am I?
Well, I would definitely agree that bigotry could come with like a subconscious level of things that you were just taught or picked up on.
Hmm.
But I don't.
So
Go ahead.
well, I was just thinking, it's like when we think back to the racism in Jim Crow South and that sort of bigotry.
Mhm.
This is just a completely different thing, but I think that they try to draw the parallel because there's that same level of shaming.
I get what you're
And
saying. You
yeah, and it's ironic that they're shaming people for shaming.
Mm.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a big double standard, and
There's a lot
it's
of double standards. And another thing I would add is that, briefly in the last podcast, I mentioned certain tactics that some of the alt-right will go to. And I wanted to make the point that these tactics are shared between the social justice warriors.
It's interesting. The difference. Somebody asked me what the difference between the radical left and the radical right was, and I said that it was the radical left thinks that HARP is a weather control device, and the radical right thinks it's a mind control device. And I think
Weather
that by,
control and mind control.
right, but it's like I think that any kind of extremism shares tactics. It's just that they have different hues of interpretation.
Yeah, it
Right.
emerges differently. It presents differently.
Right.
Same
But both of
underlying
them, both of
symptoms.
them will stoop to trying to destroy someone for their political opinions.
So why is being a social justice warrior acceptable socially? Because who's the biggest public example? Nancy Grace, and she's like a horrible, despicable person.
Wait,
I
Nancy
mean,
Grace is the poster child for social
that's.
justice warriorship?
I mean, she has the complete mo of it. It's like complete, total public shaming. Like how many times does she come out and completely publicly shame someone, and then she was wrong? You know what I mean?
Right.
I know
yeah.
what you're saying.
Yeah, it's like that kind of a thing. It is social justice. Who's gonna fight for these children, Ben?
Yeah. I don't know.
I,
Not
I
me.
guess the one that everyone's been talking about lately is Anita Sarkeesian, though.
Well,
Anita Sarkeesian and Sui Park are the two
yeah.
big
And
names.
what's that? The girl with the glasses from YouTube. Can't think of her name right now. Rebecca something.
Hmm.
The,
Rebecca
the girl
Black.
who was in Rebecca Black, I think it was.
She was in
Isn't it-
Friday.
I was about to say that,
Yeah.
but you could just pull their own tactics back on them and just cherry pick for the most radical voices, like blogging feminists who claim that all penis and vagina sex is rape because women are brainwashed by the patriarchy before they even know what sex is.
Because it is. It is rape. No. Okay. Yeah. Right. So these are these are the extremes to which like these kinds of. I mean, now that's just a full blown neuroses. Neurosis.
Well, yeah, but I think the thing is remember the first conversation that you and I had about how neo-Nazis rope in people?
Well, how is that? Refresh my memory.
So they just pick kids who are completely isolated. They have no friends. Their family life is crap,
Mhm.
and it's just an easy in. They're like, here's an identity preformed. Remember we were talking about like how people just walk into church and assume a
Right, join
Christian
the group.
identity. They assume instant community.
Right.
I mean, Apple makes all their money selling a lifestyle in the same kind of
But it's
way.
actually how fucked up is it that it's harder to be accepted into SJW circles than it would be into the white nationalist movement. It's kind
That's
of
because
bizarre.
well, that's because the white nationalist movement doesn't have a systemic legitimizing force in
That's
academia.
right.
And they don't have the membership either. That's the thing. Like they're actively seeking new members. If you
Well,
if
that's
you
that's where the whole third positionism thing comes in, where it's like, yeah, they're a castigated group or whatever. They don't have the support, like he's saying, from like academia. They're not as socially accepted.
Mhm.
So for them, they kind of have to go out of their way to come up with infiltration tactics and stuff like that.
Nice.
Right. Plus, there's really no feel good thing about the white nationalist movement,
Yeah.
where it's like, oh, look at me, I'm helping people. It's like I think that the white nationalist movement at best could be said, oh, I'm helping my fellow white man, which excludes half the population. So it's
Right.
like, and it's always done in secret.
Hmm. That's one of the hallmarks of the right wing extremist groups is that, and this going back to the Ku Klux Klan with the donning of the hoods and so on, obscuring the identity.
So wait, is KKK the original Anonymous?
Oh,
What?
I don't know where to put Anonymous in this, because you have elements within Anonymous that have qualities of being kind of white nationalist, but there's also this hardcore SJW component as well, and then there's kind of like I don't know where what you'd qualify their
It
operations.
seems like it's
against ISIS as.
whatever the individuals make it from whatever their bias is, pretty
That's the
much.
thing about anonymous, right? There's no real way to
Right.
categorize them
Or even take a poll.
politically. Right.
But I don't know. The interesting thing about all this, and I was talking to one of my British friends about it, is that I think that this whole movement is just internally parasitic, and that all left-wing paradigms are doomed to collapse on themselves in the United States because progressivism requires a big tent philosophy, and you have all these groups that just don't get along. So how many feminists do you think are willing to say things about the black community objectifying women in hip hop videos?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's like it's that sort of a thing. And so, and the thing that I've noticed about minority groups in all situations is they will all cut each other's throats out to be number two.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at them. They're out moralizing each other. Isn't that exactly
I see,
what that is?
Exactly. What at some point doesn't the feminist movement kind of reach an apex at which point they can no longer reproduce because they've kind of what's the opposite of misogyny? Androgyny? No.
No.
What is it?
The opposite of misogyny is misandry.
Misandry, right? Where they've reached that apex where they're not even reproducing. So
Well, I mean, they have the universities though. They're drawing.
that's how the meme propagates exactly through the universities, through the literature.
And it's hard to undo that type of psychological identity damage because they are identity forming beliefs.
Now, before people ridicule us for kind of being anti-feminism, I would like to state for the record that we are in complete. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for you guys, but me personally, I'm all for equality of the sexes.
Well, I'm a big supporter of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution.
Was that?
I would say that I'm
equal protection.
I would just say that I'm an egalitarian in my basic beliefs, and you could say that the very basics of feminism goes along with that, but in my opinion, what feminism has become is not egalitarian.
Right. In the same way that what the social justice warrior movement has become is a far cry from maybe what Martin Luther King Jr. had intended, or some of the early civil rights movement.
Wasn't Martin Luther King Jr. actually a right winger?
I wouldn't say he was a right winger, but
he definitely Christian values, right?
But yeah. Well, if that's what you mean, he definitely has had a religious bend.
Right. Well, I mean, that seemed to coincide though around the same time as the moral majority movement, right? With back in the 70s with Jerry Falwell.
Yeah, but those people were the same people who would have opposed King, though.
Right. Well, not true though, because at the time, because Ben and I had talked about this, the Republicans had lost the black vote due to Barry Goldwater's position on the Civil Rights Act of 1965.
Right.
Because the African Americans traditionally voted for Lincoln or voted for Republicans because he was that was the party of Lincoln.
It was when all the Southern Democrats fled to the Republican Party.
Right, that happened like because of the moral majority. I think that was all like the marriage of religion and politics in America.
Yeah, and it was when
all fed together, right.
Who was the president with the buck stops here or whatever? LBJ.
Right.
I believe there was some quote where LBJ said like, "We just lost the South for decades."
Right.
Basically, that's what happened.
The interesting thing, though, is that it was opposed completely on libertarian principles. It had nothing to do with racism at all.
You're talking about Goldwater?
Yeah.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Right. It was like he's like, this isn't the role of government to enforce this kind of stuff, and I don't want to set this precedent. But it wasn't played that way in progressive circles, obviously.
Right, and of course there was that group of people who had other motivations.
Right.
Where does this lead? That's what I'm wondering. Like, what does the future portend for these movements? Like you said, or I don't know, what was it, SJW movement more broadly, or feminism more specifically that was parasitical? So yeah,
Well, I never come across this in real life though. It's only on the internet.
there's
Like,
a lot of that.
yeah, it seems to all be in social media, and it's only. I think that the overwhelming majority of people are just completely unconvinced. And that's why I don't see like the social justice warrior stuff flashing all over Facebook the way that I do Twitter. Because I think that Twitter's a hardcore, more internet crowd, and Facebook is like generally a more casual one.
I could see that.
Yeah, I mean you definitely see it less on Facebook than Twitter, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't use Twitter personally.
I mean, it depends who you're friends with. I'm sure if you're in
That's
college
true.
and you're at university and your friends are all university students, you're seeing a lot more outspoken people. But I mean, definitely on Twitter, as a rule, it's much more vociferous in nature because of that. There's that curtain of anonymity that you can have there. You know,
And there isn't, and that anonymity doesn't exist on Facebook, really.
not as much, not to that degree, because your face is there, or generally your face is there. You have to use your real name, etc.
Right.
Or at least now you do.
Now you do, right? You're instituting that. People are trying to fight that, though. There's some like punk rock star who has a bizarre name, and Facebook won't let him use it or whatever. But I mean, so in speaking about failures of the left wing, like what else? What other critiques are there? Are we essentially saying at the end of the day, just like suck it up, like stop whining? Like what is the message?
Well, it's not maybe not just suck it up or stop whining, but to me, it's just I don't know. I think people have an obsessive personal identity problem. They need to get over themselves.
Well, it's all low self-esteem. Did you listen to the first podcast that I talked with Ben on?
I did not.
So
I talked about this for about, I don't know, about like a half hour, 45 minutes, I think, about the role of low self-esteem in social forming. Yeah, and
Makes
how
sense.
it's all over the place, and how our entire economy is predicated on external validation. And so, of course, we ended up here.
did we get into this with the terrorism as well in the
Yeah,
podcast?
we started touching on it, but then we ended up talking about
Syria
Putin
and
and,
everything.
and Putin and Russia, and for probably longer than we should have, because
I'm
we were way out of our depth on that, I think.
I'm
But
struck by the irony that I think a great number of the social justice warriors on the left who are so consumed by this ego struggle or whatever it is they're like the hippies that haven't taken LSD yet. It's like just take the hallucinogen, shed your fucking ego, and recage your thoughts, because I don't know, it's getting pretty wild. But then I'm worried maybe it's populated by people who have taken too much.
I think I just figured out something
Awesome.
that's illuminating. Hollywood actors have been doing this for years.
What's that?
The whole social justice warrior thing.
They have.
They've been doing it forever, and now, and they could do it because they had a cross media platform where millions of people could hear them. And guess what? Now everyone does. So all the people who have the same mental disorders as these Hollywood people are just doing the same thing that those people did. Makes sense though, right? Because it's the same thing. It's like it's being a well, I guess there's the money issue too, but I guess just being outraged is as good enough as giving $500,000.
There's being outraged, and I think part of it is, how would I put it? It's being paranoia is the key word for me. It's paranoid about how the world stands versus your personal identity.
Well,
Like when people are going out of their way to say like video games are oppressive of women,
Yeah.
and like, oh, there's, if the issues people are focusing on is like, oh, there's not enough good female video game characters, and there's not enough respect for overweight models. Like, What?
Right.
I don't know. It's just you're paranoid that the world is against you, and you're filtering the whole world through this patriarchy theory.
Well,
It
yeah, I
seems
mean,
very one-dimensional to me.
that's the same problem that I have with Howard Zinn, though, is that he interprets American history through a lens of European classism that doesn't exist here, and you end up coming out with a lot of gibberish in the end, the same way that you do with this.
I like Howard Zinn personally. The People's History of the United States, I think, is a good text in that it kind of does well to dispel the, I don't know, this myth that our historic figures can do no wrong. Like that history is written by the victors. Yeah, that might be true, but that doesn't make them good people.
Yeah, but Howard Zinn also ideologically, willfully excludes lots of information to make his point.
In People's History of the United States, that Columbus was not uh, uh, engaging in what would be
Well,
considered crimes against humanity today?
well, one thing that I would say is that he definitely doesn't dispel the noble savage in
Right,
that.
no, that's true. He romanticizes the natives who
Right.
were themselves actually really these were violent people, just as violent as the Europeans.
Oh
just
yeah,
as flawed.
like that's the thing is that there's just tons and tons of information about intertribal warfare and how brutal it was, and it was just as brutal as anything that the Spaniards did to the Native Americans. So I
That's
mean,
true. That seems
I'm
like
not-
this was brought up last time. That these lines of thinking defeat the anarcho-primitivists. That's all I'll say.
yes,
Yeah.
they do.
right. Well, we talked a little bit about anarchy and like a lot of the flaws. Like how do you work justice when you have private police forces setting up everything? Like don't we kind of need a universal?
Right. Well, my response to that is first that that's anarcho-capitalism, which isn't really anarchy.
Right.
But aside from views, like I sympathize with anarchism, but I don't consider myself a believer in the creation. I don't consider myself a believer in some grand revolution that's going to usher in a new society. I'm a complete cynic. If you could consider myself to still be an anarchist, I consider my anarchism just sort of a disposition of cynicism towards institutions,
Well,
if that makes sense.
I think that if anything's going to institute that kind of egalitarianism, it's going to be the Matrix.
Well,
I mean, if
there's
you
a good
think-
point
'cause then
that
you're eliminating like that physical need and everything becomes digital, and like as we know with the distribution of digital media, that's basically infinite as long as you have bandwidth.
well, the more general point I would make is that changes in technology are probably one of the only things that can help usher it in. And
Yeah.
alongside that is post-scarcity, basically.
Right.
I think because that's the
Well-
big thing. Is scarcity is the big thing that's holding back these
Right.
conditions.
But the Matrix is the vehicle to post scarcity.
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, unless we get that asteroid mining thing up and running, which they're talking about doing, but that's not going to be in our lifetime, I don't think.
Yeah. I just want to be clear that like I might still call myself an anarchist, but I've abandoned any notion of belonging to a specific like ideological group. I don't consider myself a what would call it? I don't consider myself an activist in any normal sense.
Progressive?
I don't use that word.
What about egalitarian? I mean, you use that.
That's
rather.
I'm egalitarian, sure.
That's just as a general rule, though. Nothing more specific than that. I mean,
No,
are you going to be voting in the election?
I don't believe in, like, oh, I'm a syndicalist and then hanging out with syndicalists. That's what I mean. I don't believe in the group dynamics of belonging to an ideological group. I think it goes bad even with anarchists the moment people do it.
Are the syndicalists kind of representative of the left wing within anarchy, or is that the anarcho-primitivists?
They're one of the big ones. There's the syndicalists, there's the communists. There's not that much difference between them. The syndicalists just have a certain focus on unions. The primitivists are their own kind of category. And something I notice sometimes is that they overlap with both the communists and the primitivists tend to romanticize primitive societies. And like he was
Right.
saying earlier, they kind of conveniently leave out the fact that there's no way to sustain a modern population with the means of those
Right.
societies.
Well, I mean, that's what happened with,
With
the human exodus north out of Africa. Whenever that happened, I don't know if it was 100,000 years ago or 80,000, but it was,
A while
you know,
ago.
yeah,
wait,
it happened a ways back.
why? What was the
Scarcity and overpopulation.
scarcity and overpopulation?
Right. Food pressures obviously push people. It's interesting because people ask why, if Africa has been around, for so long with human populations, why it's so undeveloped, but it's because of a lack of pressure to secure livelihood. When you have food everywhere and you have a climate that, doesn't really require you to store up for the winter or anything like that, like you don't really need innovation to survive so much. And the further north and the further away you get from that, the pressure of population and scarcity necessitate invention, or populations eventually die. But I don't kind of want to get into that, really. It's just a
Okay.
thought. But it makes sense.
It's an interesting thought. I mean, it's interesting that, the next logical step was Egypt and then the Middle East as far as innovation.
Right.
And that was just north of there.
Yeah.
What else do
But-
we have for? I mean, okay, so
Well,
you
one
want
thing
to
I want.
continue that? Go.
Well, no, I wanted to kind of go back to where we were because
Right.
I wanted to talk about the right wing's version of social justice warrioring that isn't getting talked about, that I think requires just as much skewering. So the right wing's hurt feelings card of Christians are like getting run out of American society, gay marriage,
The
is
war on
offensive to
Christmas.
us. Right.
I've
It's
always
all-
felt that they're complete hypocrites to talk about political correctness when they have their own version of political correctness, which is anything that offends their crazy version of Christianity, basically.
Right.
Right.
So what about it? I mean, definitely, this is like what the equivalent of a social justice warrior complaining that a room full of white people is a microaggression. Is that when I go
Yes.
into Starbucks and it doesn't say Merry Christmas on the red cup? That is
Yep. Yeah, happy holidays to them is the same as like, some racial pejorative.
Pretty much. They have made themselves into a victim group over nothing, and they're the least victimized group of all.
right.
So
Were you
in a sense, I give one slight bone to the left-wing social justice warriors. At least the people that they try to vouch for have, at least in some cases, historically been victimized.
Well, hey, now there are the Jews,
Yep, there's that too.
which it seems to be okay to be anti-Semitic if you're left wing, which is insane. But it's kind of like not put that way.
We talked about that, but is that left wing? I guess if you
Yeah, it
call
is.
people who are critical of the state of Israel, or not necessarily the state of Israel, but Zionism.
But it's more than that, though. It's like the whole quote-unquote Charlie Sheen, the Jews run Hollywood, and it's all like a world conspiracy and stuff, and all
yeah,
that crap.
that's.
I will
crazy.
agree that there's a certain portion of the left wing that is roped in by the whole like New World Order conspiracy stuff, which usually has anti-Semitism creep into it at some point.
See, that's interesting because we were talking about the New World Order versus what I call the Jew World Order, and like the role of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and how
Right.
there's like infighting amongst conspiracy theorists, and how the right wing, it is the left wing that seems to be anti-Zionist because the right wing embraces Zionism because they believe, in biblical Armageddon and all that. It's just a fascinating thing.
So then, anti-Semitism is now a left-wing phenomena. Like back in 1930s in Germany, this was was it a left-wing thing? Was
see,
Hitler a
here's-
social? I mean, he was a what is it? National Socialist, or
Yeah, but it wasn't really socialism, though. Not really.
Right.
so he was
well,
a
I
right-wing
think
fascist.
I think an important point to make here is that from the very beginning, Nazism exploited nominally left-wing ideas to get people on board.
Right.
That's why it was National Socialism. It used socialism and rhetoric about white workers to rope people in.
Right, but it was conservative in that reactionary kind of way because they bought into that Hegelian romantic notion of the strong German.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. So in that way, they use left wing means to get to right wing principles. Because
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it.
somebody asked me to define the difference between left and right wing, and I said, really, it's the question of, is the best world ahead of us or is it behind us? Is society degrading or is it ascending?
Yeah,
And
it's somewhat of it is
arguments both ways.
forward-looking and backward-looking.
Right. So it's
And
like you can romanticize ancient Greece in Rome.
I actually know of a few libertarians who do that.
Right. And there's a few people that they call for that. Like, I think it's Julius. I can't remember his name now. Julius Evola. He's like a radical kind of throwback.
Yeah, they look back kind of favorably upon ancient Rome and think
Right.
that the life would be so much better. If I met a Marine Corps recon scout sniper who espoused that belief too, like the glorification of Rome, or kind of looking back on Rome as like the model by which we should be, I don't know,
That's
organizing
interesting.
our
It kind of reminds me, I mean, I don't want to go too off topic, but the arguments I've seen from anarcho-capitalists about free markets, if you look, when they actually try to go into history, it's just so bizarre. They all choose pre-capitalist societies as examples of how private justice will work. And the examples they always point to, in some cases, they point to certain aspects of ancient Greece. They point to the medieval Iceland, of all things. And they point to tribal societies. And it's like, wait, all of these are pre-capitalist societies.
Right.
Like, how are you going to apply ideas of models that worked then to a modern post-industrial society?
Are these like the pro-monarchy people too?
Not all of them.
Okay.
These are just run-of-the-mill anarcho-capitalists who are looking for some kind of historical argument to back up their ideas. And they just so
All
happen to
pre-capitalist.
focus on medieval Iceland and things like that.
Right.
Well,
But if you look at medieval Iceland, it's like, okay, they technically had set private courts or something like that, or private police, but they pretty much were a feudalist society.
Right. Yeah.
but police in America aren't dispensers of justice. They're just they're corrallers, right? It's not kind of the same thing like a private police force, because here's the deal, right? Let's say we have a stateless society and we have towns or something, and somebody from another town, I don't know, rapes my sister, right? And so who am I hiring as a private police force to pick up this guy?
Right.
Who's to say that there's any existing agreement between my territory and theirs? Because then all of a sudden you're getting back into statehood, right? It's
Absolutely.
like you have
Right.
these
Exactly. That
invisible
was the point
borders.
that Brainpolice made in the last podcast, which is that
Right.
eventually you end up becoming that which you were,
Right.
There's just no practical way to get around that.
Yeah.
That's what's wrong with the world, though, is because, like, when I look at the social justice warrior stuff and left versus right, it's because of that all or none political system we have. There's one winner and everybody else loses. So that means that everybody is going to dogpile into one of two groups, because that's the only chance they have. Because if they don't do it, somebody else is going to do it, and they're just going to lose out on everything. So the reality is that, like, the left wing big tent deal is that they all pile together and they only end up getting maybe 2% of what they actually want, and then they call the progressive sellouts. Because it doesn't matter who votes for them, we know where the money comes from for both parties, right?
Right.
So and that's always going to be the bottom line. And I think it's interesting that companies are the ones who are empowering social justice warriors by firing people and, like, being politically correct because they don't want to alienate any money sources. Right. And so I think all this kind of just ties together.
Well, I wanted to go back for a second. You said that the left uses you had with the Nazis, you had them using right-wing ideals to reach left-wing goals.
Other way around.
No, well, the other way around, yeah.
Using right-wing ideals to reach left-wing goals.
They're using left-wing economics to achieve right-wing social change.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, like, typically I don't. Now, obviously, there are historical antecedents or whatever, but
Right.
the left that I've seen in the United States has never really been violent. Like I haven't seen the left wing. I mean, you could say that the Weather Underground, but they were blowing up, you know, government buildings when no one was in them, you know, or they were blowing themselves up. Uh, is there a potential for what's going on? What are you doing with the paper over there?
Sorry.
Okay. What is there a potential for the social justice warrior left now to turn violent? Is that
I
is
mean,
that
in,
already
in
happening?
some cases they actually do.
I think it's
It-
state violence though.
What agent provocateurs like in order to
Yeah,
take
there's
down?
that.
I don't think it's that though so much as getting people fired from their jobs
Yeah, there's getting people
is it
fired
is
from their jobs.
I think that's social violence in my opinion.
I get what you're saying, yeah, because you're totally trying to destroy someone's life.
Right. You're trying to shame them on social media so that they can't go anywhere in the country without being recognized and shamed. There's like
Right,
no
which is interesting
opportunity.
because that's an idea that some of the right wing people advocate for the people they find undesirable.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Um,
Michael Savage has been doing that for 20 years, so
but yeah, I totally am pretty strongly opposed to the idea of trying to social ostracize someone over matters like that.
Mhm.
It's just like,
well,
really?
well, it's a shame related to low self-esteem. They feel ashamed of themselves for being unaccomplished, so they pass the shame hot potato to someone else. And it's
John,
all related to identity and identity politics and low self-esteem and
Hmm.
external validation. Because that's what it is. They're looking for external validation because all of a sudden, all I have to do is say, fuck the patriarchy, and all these feminists are just my friends without knowing anything about me.
right. Have you read the John Ronson book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed? The new book
No,
that he had?
no, I haven't.
This is from the author who wrote The Psychopath Test and The Men Who Stare at Goats.
Ah,
The book is about public shaming in the age of social media. There was a journalist who was traveling to Africa, and she may have had like, you know, between, I don't know, less than 50 followers on her Twitter, and she made this thing. She's like,
right.
going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Oh no, I won't. I'm white. She said something to that effect. Just a dumb joke, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll go say that on Twitter right now. I don't care.
And
You know
and
what I mean?
then when she touched down, she and got
Right.
email, she saw that she had been fired.
Right. That's her employer's responsibility, though. They're just cowards.
They're just cowards. Like
Right.
there was another guy that was on the Rogan podcast recently. Did you listen to that, Zanish? Where he was worked for a video game company, Call of Duty. He was like their community manager. And
Yeah, I heard that.
he said something in social media, and then the next day he couldn't access his email. He had been fired. They didn't even ask his side of the story. They were so scared. Like, it's weird. The social justice warriors can hold industries hostage, and they really do, because they comprise the majority of their customer base, or at
But they
least they
don't.
think
They're
they do.
not. See, that's the thing, though, is that it's just like I
They
think
don't.
Anthony Akumi's firing from Sirius XM is the best example of this.
What was that situation?
So basically, Anthony Cumia was out just taking photographs in New York City, and like because he was a photograph enthusiast, it was like 2 a.m, and this black woman who's a prostitute, apparently, not that that should really matter, but she started beating him in the face with a camera, telling him not to take pictures anymore and stuff like that. And he was packing a 45 Magnum on him, and he didn't pull it. But he went home and he started posting, like, calling her an animal and stuff like that, and saying people like her, and people just took it all as racist. Well, a few people did. And so the media started pressuring the owners of Sirius XM, who never had that kind of heat before. And had they just let it go, the whole thing probably would have blown over if they just said no comment. I mean, maybe a few people would have unsubscribed, but I think they ended up losing a lot more people because
as
they
a result of the firing.
Right.
I find it dubious, though, just like off the bat, that she would start assaulting him without provocation. I mean,
There's pictures of his face all fucked up.
Okay, that's after the fact, though. Like,
Right.
that's.
I mean, he had a gun. Like, if he wanted to do something to her, he could have.
What I'm saying is that what was he doing? Was he taking photographs of her? Was she in the frame?
Of architecture, but I think that you asking these questions is akin to asking a rape victim what she was wearing.
See, that's like that's interesting that you say that. Like, this is my curious nature, is that I want to know, like, what would compel someone to just do that. Like, it kind of strikes me as rather bizarre that she would immediately start attacking him without provocation.
Because he was just taking photos. Maybe she thought he was a stalker or something like that. But that doesn't, even if he was stalking her and taking photos of her, that doesn't give her a right to assault him. Correct?
No, of course. Yeah, that's true.
Right. But you see what I'm saying, though, with like the rape victim, because it's like it must have been his fault that he got attacked. You know what I mean? It's
I understand that completely.
Right.
That makes sense. But still, like, what if he was trying to solicit her and it didn't go right? And it's all conjecture. I'm saying, like, just for the sake of the argument, though, I think it's kind of bizarre to assume that he would just start getting assaulted in the same way when, you know, I don't know. I'm not going to get too much further into it, but
well, you know, it's interesting if he was soliciting her, then calling him a racist in retrospect would be hilarious.
Yeah, right. I mean, the whole situation is just kind of a clusterfuck.
Right, but it's like SiriusXM didn't at all wait to hear his side. They just fired him because of media pressure.
Yeah, that's bullshit. I mean,
and it wasn't even a lot of media pressure either. It was just a few reporters calling for comments.
Same thing happened with this Call of Duty guy who worked for Activision or whatever. That's interesting. The types of violence that they prosecute mostly, or these are acts of violence. I'd be willing to say that someone getting fired from their job would constitute an act of violence, but not in the Oklahoma City bombing sense. Like, this is the distinction. I'm wondering, is there room for a new mutation? In the last podcast with Brainpolice, we were discussing how the white nationalist movement has infected or has attempted to jettison or has found a kindred spirit in some elements within the transhumanist community. And that's our own problem within transhumanism that we have to deal with. But, like, I'm looking for the next flashpoint where that might exist. Would it be anarcho-primitivists who think that technology is bad in the Hugo de Garishian sense, whereby they might start a war to prevent the invention of artificial intelligence or something like that? Like, what does the future look like?
Well, what I see happening is
you think the SJW movement is just going to collapse in on itself? You've stated that at the top of the show.
It eats its own already, yeah.
Yeah. There was just some other thing where some big social justice warrior got publicly ashamed for something by another social justice warrior. And here's the thing. Right. I forget what the details were.
Who can out social justice warrior the other one?
Well, but part of the whole aspect of being a social justice warrior is what's the term I'm thinking of? It's basically proving that you're more oppressed than the next person as part of it.
Yeah,
Well, I want to call out a couple of examples real quick, though. Let's talk about George Zimmerman and how Spike Lee irresponsibly posted what he thought was his home address and personal information on Twitter and said, you know, I'm not saying anybody should commit acts of violence, but, you know.
Come on, really?
But implicitly, there's some act of violence that can happen, yeah.
Right, and it wasn't even the right Zimmermans, and, like...
my God.
And those Zimmermans got all kinds of death threats, and like the police had to take them out of their home for their own protection. They weren't even related to George Zimmerman.
Certainly they sued.
There was no repercussions to Spike Lee at all. None.
Spike Lee's kind of made himself a pariah in his own right within the black community as a result of the manner in which he filmed his recent film Chirac.
I'm not familiar.
There's a new film by Spike Lee called Chirac, and the criticism is that it doesn't portray the what is happening there in as serious a light as it needs to be. Like it's highly satirical, is what people, and he's not treating the subject matter with the due reverence and respect that people feel, SJWs particularly, but just people in general otherwise think that it deserves.
Well, the SJWs are the ones who are quote unquote doxing people on social media and saying that it's morally justified. Like,
Even though the
and
implication is
obviously,
that crime could be committed against people. Yeah.
right? Well, it's like it's the same people who say good when someone gets raped in prison. It's, you know what I mean?
It is a vengeance mentality, yes.
Right. And then when I think about the stuff that happened to the dentist who killed Cecil the Lion,
Right. Oh,
and it's
awful.
right, it's the same kind of thing. The guy obviously didn't deserve that. I mean, he wasn't charged with a crime in Zimbabwe.
No. Yeah, the lion had there were reports that they had lured the lion away from its enclosure or wherever, to whatever territory it has that's protected, and that they did that. But I don't know if that was ever proven or
well,
what.
he was charged for luring in another thing, but they didn't charge him with it in this case.
See, that's suspicious to me. Like,
right, but even if that is the case, it's not a United States issue, and so.
Yeah, but just because I commit a crime in Canada, a heinous crime or whatever, and step across the border doesn't mean I'm no less criminal. I mean, yeah, in the eyes of the law, perhaps, but
I think I don't know, I think it's kind of a way of skirting around equal protection. It's like using public shame as vigilante justice because people aren't happy with the outcomes. Especially, like, look at the... see, one of the issues that this is really super controversial, but I feel like we should have, if we're going to have a sexual offender registry database, then I should be notified when a convicted arsonist moves into my neighborhood and a convicted murderer too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, those would be good things to know.
Yeah, why stop at that? But yeah, that also opens up the debate on whether or not you should have the sex offender registry at all. Either.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, but I kind of don't want to make that argument because of recidivism rates of sex offenders. You know, that's like a whole different thing.
Right, but you are kind of opening up that debate by optioning that.
But I think it should be. I think it should be all criminals on that database who are convicted of anything violent, at least.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that would be an advent. I don't know.
Right.
But we are just short of the hour. This was edifying, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining with me on this podcast. Let's do it again soon. Brainpolice, Alex Streckel Guitar at YouTube, Zanish at yahoo.com with any questions, comments, concerns, or doxing requests or whatever you can send to him.
Oh, no.
Thanks for equating me with someone who shames a rape victim. Appreciate that, Zanish. That was good broadcasting.
You support the patriarchy, Ben.
Yeah, how dare you? Let's see how many social justice warriors can criticize us for this podcast, and then let's sit back and watch how many other social justice warriors can out-social justice warrior those social justice warriors. Let's sit back and watch the fireworks. Thanks again, gentlemen. This is the Get Busy podcast. Again, if you were educated or entertained, please click the PayPal link and donate. We are run completely off user donations. We don't have sponsorship yet. We're looking to be sustainable. So please, if you enjoyed this hour, donate. Appreciate it very much. Thanks again, Brainpolice. And thanks, Zanish. And we'll see you next time. All right. World peace.